Welcome to the J Scott Outdoors podcast. Today we've got my hunting partner Darr Colburn on the line, and we actually did a full-blown hour and a half long recap of the mountain goat, Alaskan mountain goat hunt yesterday. And needless to say, the audio portion of Darr's part of the podcast did not get recorded. Major snafu on my part. After throwing my computer through the second floor window here at the condo in Colorado and going down and picking up all the pieces, I think we got it fixed, and we're going to try a little take two today and do a little recap with Darr. Darr, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. I'm going to go ahead and run portions of the audio from yesterday, but I think there's some key ingredients from the recap that the listeners can get some value out of from your perspective. Um, First and foremost, congratulations on your goat and a successful hunt in Alaska, but it was hard earned, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I would say it's not my goat, it's our goat. We hunted together and we earned it, and it was quite the experience.
Yeah, it was quite the experience. I actually went out and hiked today, and although nothing like what we encountered there in Alaska with all the brush, my body was a little bit going, "Oh, okay, you want to do this again?" I had given myself a couple days off. I'm curious how your body's responding.
Yeah, I haven't been out doing any hiking yet. I've just kind of been, letting my body recoup a little bit. But I would say that I think we both trained a lot for this hunt, thinking, we were going to be hiking a ton in steep country, and I don't think the distance or the steepness was a factor more than just the thick brush.
Yeah, and
Would you
I
would you
was
agree with that?
yeah, I was talking to someone yesterday and they were asking me about it and I'm like, you can train all you want, but at some point strength is a huge part of it because with the alders and the devil's club and the raspberry bushes and blueberry bushes and all of the thick underbrush, it wasn't a function of like how fast can you climb to the top of this mountain. It was more of how much can you endure every step, on uneven terrain and then having brush all around your legs and ankles and knees and, having to like kind of plow through it. Fortunately, our guide, Joe Faulkner, a lot of times was cutting trail, and leading the pack, so to speak. But still, even if you were third in line, and you and I took turns second and third walking, you still had lots of brush to fight through, and it kind of added a whole different element that I don't know that you can necessarily train for unless you just start brush busting.
Yeah, I mean it was more endurance and stamina than being able to walk, 10 miles really for me.
Yeah, I mean that first stretch up out of the beach, we covered 0.79 miles, and it took us 5 hours. And most of that, I would say, was dealing with the the trees that were blown down, and they just were like Lincoln logs, literally just blown down in every direction. And so you'd get over one log or under one log, by taking your pack off or helping your buddy cross over, and then, you know, uh, you'd have a whole other angle of a log that you'd either have to go around or over or under, and it was fairly tedious. Um, and we covered a lot of this yesterday, and the listeners can listen to my portion of the audio and probably pick up a lot of what we were saying. I kind of want to dive into the gear, and I'd also like to talk about your food and start off with kind of the food in kind of would you take anything different, and what did you take that you found was perfect, and kind of talk about your food for the trip, and then they're going to be able to listen to my answer to this question. So let's get your answer.
Well, food wise, I took similar to you a breakfast, Mountain House breakfast, pretty much every day, with the exception of two. and then a Mountain House dinner. I did take the 2 portion breakfasts and dinners that were the little bit bigger size, and I believe you had the Pro Packs, which were a portion or 1.5 portions, but they were quite a bit smaller. I do like a big dinner after a long day. It seemed to fill me up, and satisfy me at night, and then, be ready to go in the morning. My breakfast, I had the Mountain House skillet, which was probably my favorite.
Yeah, mine too.
Yeah, I did have some biscuit and gravy a couple mornings, and then I took some blueberry muffin oatmeal that had blueberries and flaxseed in it that was really good as well.
Talk about your spacing out of your food, and I know you're going to get into more of your food, but how did you space that out as far as eating throughout the day?
Well, for me, I don't like eating a big breakfast right when I get up, so I would have my cup of coffee in the morning, and maybe a little snack of some sort or nothing, and then but make my Mountain House, boil the water, and then roll it up and put it in my pack, and eat it an hour or two down the trail. That just suits me better. So I had that every day, and then I had a gallon Ziploc full of lunch and day stuff for each day. So I had, peanut M&Ms, a bagel thin with peanut butter and honey, full-size Snickers, some beef jerky. I had a Pro Bar or two throughout the trip, some little packages of trail mix, some like pepperoni meat sticks, that sort of stuff. Some of the wafer waffle honey stinger waffles in there. And for me, I just don't, I can eat a Pro Bar or bar like that every once in a while, but to live on it every day just doesn't suit me. I like the more real food, like the bagel and the pepperoni sticks, peanut M&Ms, trail mix, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, one Pro Bar that I found on this trip that I wish I would have had it every day is, I think it's Banana Nut Pro Bar, which just was so tasty. I have, previously eaten a lot of the different peanut butter ones, and I'm not a huge peanut butter fan, but I found this Banana Nut Pro Bar, and I believe I had 2 out of the 5 days, and then I had some other peanut. And if anybody out there likes banana nut bread or that flavor, highly recommend that Pro Bar in the banana nut flavor. It was really good. And next time I go out, I'm definitely going to probably have one of those Pro Bars every day. Um, so food wise, and then we talked yesterday a little bit about filtering water. We took a Sawyer mini filter, and that seemed to work very well for us. One question that came in since then on our Instagram is, would you use that in an Arizona stock pond? And I'll get your answer, Dar, but my answer would be absolutely. Seth Maskey and I have drank on those sheep hunts literally out of just little potholes that are green and nasty. You look at it and you want to throw up, but once you filter it, the water's great. Um, and do you have any experience with that, Dar?
Yeah, I've had some pretty bad looking water down in Mexico with that. Obviously, I think if you have a choice, you'd want to take moving water if you could, but if that's your only choice, I mean, that's what you got. So yeah, I would have no problem drinking out of it if that's what it came down to.
For sure.
Um, One thing we both took, each had a platypus, just 2 liter, I believe, 2 or 3 liter collapsible jugs that we were filling up and leaving at camp. We'd fill that every day, and that way we'd have water for our breakfast and dinners. But also we found with that Sawyer Mini, I believe it comes with about a pint bag that you put the water in, and then you screw the filter on that. I think, we found that if you could get a 2 liter platypus type bag that was a dirty water bag, it would make it a lot easier, because it seemed like we spent a lot of time filling up that little bottle and filtering it instead of using a 2-liter bag where you could get quite a bit of dirty water in there and then filter it all at once.
For sure, and I think you used some of those Wilderness Athlete packets. And one thing I would say for the guys that are filtering their water, even in some of those stock ponds, when you filter the water and it goes, say, from the dirty bag to the clean water bag or into your bottle, it's sometimes not going to be crystal clear. And one thing I would say is, take those packets like Darr had, and whether it's Crystal Light or whatever you're drinking, Wilderness Athlete, Hydrate and Recover, whatever, you can flavor that, because sometimes the flavor of the water isn't ideal, but in essence you're trying to just get fluids into your body, so you can kind of mask that with some of those different packets.
Yeah, and I definitely pretty much put some of that Hydrate and Recover in every bottle of water that I drank throughout the trip. I just figured I needed the electrolytes. We were sweating, working hard. So I did keep it full with the Wilderness Athlete stuff.
For sure. Let's jump over to gear and talk about some of the highlights from your perspective of gear that really worked for you, and then maybe if there was anything that you would change for the next time.
Sure. The tent, the Mountain Star 2-person tent, was the highlight. I would say it performed flawlessly. Only weighs, I think, 3 pounds, and we each had one, so it was nice to have our own tents. We stayed dry, even at a point where there was pools of water underneath the tent. The bathtub of the tent still stayed dry, so that was great. The Kuiu Rebel K boots were fantastic. They were nice and lightweight and a lot of stability in those. Pretty stiff boot, but you needed it in that country, so they were great. I would say
talk about your break-in with those Rebel Ks and how you, on one of your feet, I forget which side it is, you have a little lump on your heel and it tends to cause problems. Talk a little bit about breaking those in and breaking in any boot, and how that went, and then you ended up going with the Rebel Ks and how that worked out.
Sure. Well, I started with them, new obviously, but I had probably 40 or 50 miles on them, and I'd broken my little pinky toe a year or two ago, and it's a little bit bigger, so I was getting a blister kind of on top of that, because the Rebel Ks, I would say, run a little bit tight in the toe box, and so I was getting a blister there, and then I was running my laces pretty loose because the toe box was so tight, so my heel was slipping, and I kept getting a blister on my left rear heel, and so I was really on the fence as to whether or not I was going to take them. I had also put I believe the Superfeet Guide insole in them, and I kind of figured out by trial and error that I ended up taking that out because it was making the toe box even tighter. Went back with the original Scarpa insole, and then ended up just leucotaping my toe and my heel, along with doing the Kuiu lace up where it really locks your heel in.
And that's a video that they can go on the Kuiu YouTube channel and find that Todd Harney does, where you showed that to me and showed it to Brian Rimza, and man, that really locked your heel down. Talk a little bit about that. Continue talking about that.
Yeah, so what it allowed me to do for my foot was, being the toe box was tight, I was able to loosen up the bottom laces pretty much as loose as I could get them, and then the last couple eyelets up there, I was able to lock those down to where my heel stayed down and wasn't slipping up and down, but the rest of the boot was loose, and so it ended up being really comfortable and just worked out great. The other thing I think we talked about yesterday, which I don't know, if you got or not, your friend Eric Johnson that hunted with us turned us on to the Swiftwick Aspire 7 socks that are like a tighter liner sock. that we wore under the Kuiu socks, and they were fantastic as well. And I think the big reason, one of the big reasons that I didn't get a blister the whole time was the socks, the Luco tape.
Yeah, for sure. One thing about those Rebel Ks that I really liked is how light they are and how sturdy and stable they are as far as the sole of the shoe or the boot is really stiff, but I felt like as much side hilling that we were doing in the scree, and even on some of the slick rock and the grass and what have you, they gave you all of the stability in the world by having that super stiff sole.
Yeah, I totally agree. Totally agree.
What else stood out for you as far as gear? For me, the rain gear, the Chugach rain gear, worked fantastic. And we fought through a lot of brush and a lot of thorns and a lot of just crappy stuff, and um, that rain gear is pretty awesome.
Yeah, mine. I mean, I washed mine when I got home, and it looks brand new still. I'm really surprised that I didn't tear it based on what we went through,
Yeah.
because we it seemed like we had rain pretty much every day except one, and so after the first day that we had that was pretty nice, we pretty much lived in our rain gear. It seemed like most of the time. The the brush and the grass and everything was so wet. If it wasn't raining, you still wanted to at least wear your pants because it kept you dry.
Yeah, talk about how you started out the hunt. You carried your bow. I actually took your 6.5 Creedmoor, so we kind of had a tandem rig going there with the bow and rifle, and how the hunt transitioned for you from an archery hunt to you deciding when we found a goat or when we found a billy to go after them with your rifle.
Sure. Um, so yeah, the we spent the first day hiking and glassing, looking for goats, and we definitely saw goats, but nothing very close. Nothing even. I would say probably nothing even within a mile. That whole first day, and then the second day, pretty much same thing. We saw some goats several miles off. Kind of made a play over there, and ended up couldn't couldn't see him. Jay ended up going back to our original location to where he had a better bird's eye view of the mountain range, and signaled us that there were some goats, down the mountain a ways. So we continued to move over there, and I think we finally at about, I think it was about 5 o'clock that evening, ended up spotting them and getting over on them, and I think we were about 600 yards from them. Finally got to kind of evaluate them, and there was a few nannies and kids, and then there was another little group that had a couple younger billies. I would say, immature billies with them. And at that point, I decided I would potentially try to make a stock with my bow, but where they were and where the wind was going in the country, it really didn't allow me to circle around out of sight and get upwind of them. Um, so I had to kind of try and move across an open slope, and they saw me at about 300 yards and took off. So at that point, we were at basically the end of day two. It was about to start pouring rain for the next day and a half, and that was the first goats we had been within even rifle range of. At that point, I kind of decided, we're only going to have a day or two left, and it's not like there's been opportunities all over the place. So I kind of decided at that point I'd just leave the bow at camp.
Yeah, and I think that was a good decision. And I think anytime it was a 5 day deal, and I think I think you could have easily, not easily, but I think you could have got it done with the bow, but I think you would require quite a bit of time. And we only saw four billies total that we could actually hunt or get to. We saw some across the big, mile across the bay and stuff. and some of those different inlets, but not even country. We'd have to, either get in a boat and cross a mile over. But basically, for what you had, I mean, going with the rifle, once you found that billy, the fourth morning, I mean, it was pretty clear that you needed to, if you were going to get one, you needed to switch to a rifle. Talk a little bit about the morning that you found that billy, and the decision to go after it, and kind of how your stock and how that played out that day.
Sure. Well, that I believe it was the evening before we got back to camp, and it had kind of been raining off and on, and there was a little ridge behind camp that you could hike up to that was probably 200 yards out of our camp, and you kind of hiked up on this ridge line and could peek off the other side into a kind of a jagged peak in scree field kind of basin below the ridge line, and we had gone over there and seen a little group of goats, some nannies and kids, and a immature billy the evening before, and then so when we woke up that morning, I just decided before I did anything, I'd just kind of run up there and peek off and see if anything was over there, and right away kind of spotted. I think there was 3 or 4 goats that I could see out there, probably 700 yards, and one of them definitely had a distinctly bigger body than the others. So I came back and told you and Joe I thought there was probably a billy there just based on the body size, and we ended up running up there and getting the spotting scope and looking at him. And Joe said, "Yeah, that's a mature billy. We probably need to try and harvest that one." So at that point, I think we got our packs and made some breakfast and took it up there and kind of watched them for a while, and then it started raining, and so they were kind of bedded up on a cliffy bench up there, probably I think it was 900 1,000 yards from us, and about midday, Joe and I decided that we'd leave you to watch them while they were bedded, and we moved up kind of one bench to where we were more level across from them, but still, probably 550 yards from them. So we got up there, got set up, and Joe and I talked that, we couldn't shoot him where he was because of the cliff and the bench he was on. We needed him to actually, come towards us and off that bench in order to shoot him. And it fogged up and started raining, and we actually couldn't see the goats for probably 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And when it broke a little bit, they had gotten up and started feeding directly away from us, and came out below that bench, but farther away. And I think it was 625 yards, and the wind was bad and it was raining hard, and I didn't even want to pop my scope caps because I just knew that, the scope was going to get covered in rain. And I looked at Joe and I said, I just don't want to shoot that far in these conditions. It's not worth it to me. And so we kind of just waited, and they ended up feeding down and turning back and came right towards us, and got to probably 275 yards, and it was raining, and the clouds would come in and you couldn't see them for 10 minutes, and then the clouds would kind of break a little bit and you could see them. And in one of those breaks, Joe had told me the Billy was out front of the group, and he was at, I think, 275 yards, and I ended up shooting him. So
He made 2 great shots once we were able to get down to the Billy. Those shots were like within a half inch of each other, and um, I was only 800 yards away and never even heard both shots. That tells you what the wind and what the rain and the fog, it just was. It was one of those times, but it was one of those deals where you just like had a window and had to rely on Joe, whom I wish I could have on this podcast with us talking about it, but he headed on to go to a Chugach sheep hunt. But um, you kind of had to rely and look in your sight window, and that's the goat you saw, and you made 2 good shots. But after your first shot, he kind of just stood there, and so you decided to shoot him again. just making sure that you know had a good shot on them, right?
Yeah, definitely. And honestly, when I did shoot, like I said, the Billy had gotten out front probably 20 yards of the other three or four, and so that definitely made it easier. And Joe said yes, he's the front one, and the fog broke enough to just enough to where I could see him through the clouds, and I shot, and I couldn't even tell you where I hit him because of the fog and clouds. And Joe didn't know either, just that I had hit him pretty hard, and so I shot him again and um, finished him off right there. He didn't even take a step or two, so that was all good.
Yeah, and then I'll kind of fast forward the story. We attempted to figure out how to get down to the goat. Kind of before you shot, you guys thought you kind of had a chute that you could go down, and we ended up trying for a couple hours and kept getting cliffed out and couldn't make it down. So we actually packed up there, went back to camp, packed everything up, dropped all the way back down and around down the mountain, and then had to set camp again right before dark. And then the next morning, it took us 5 hours to get up there to the goat, fighting through the brush. But we were able to get them, and then get them back to camp. And it was definitely an amazing adventure. I'm glad. Guys are so, well, are you disappointed you didn't get one? Well, I mean, you always want to get what you're after, but it was an amazing adventure to get to watch you shoot a goat and to just be up there in that country from my perspective. And it was just awesome. And quite honestly, I don't know. I mean, if we'd have shot two goats, I mean, we had our work cut out for us packing everything out through those down timber and, fallen logs and all that brush. Two goats would have been, I mean, it would have been nasty.
We definitely would have had our hands full, but we would have made it work.
Yeah. Well, Darr, I think we've salvaged a bunch of this episode where the listeners can actually hear your portion of the audio, and I encourage them to listen to the remaining portion after this. It's pretty good dialogue back and forth. Obviously, they won't be able to hear your portion, but they'll get the gist probably by the give and take back and forth with my answers and such. So, anything else you want to add? Before I let you go, I know you're preparing for an elk hunt there in Arizona, and I'm excited to see how you do there. I know you're going to do great. I'm going to be cheering for you from Wyoming, um, but I'm ready to see you get another big bull.
Yeah, I'm just looking forward to hearing the first bugle of the season and having a good time. That's all that matters.
Right on, buddy. Well, look forward to the next adventure with you, and thank you for coming on again today and kind of redoing your portion of the audio. And I just want to thank the listeners for their patience with this episode, having a little bit of the snafu, but I feel like the remaining portion of the audio you'll be able to get some good value out of. And just thanks for your loyal support. And Darr, until next time, God bless, and we'll be chatting at you, okay?
All right, sounds good, buddy.
All right, take care.
Thanks, you too.
Welcome to the J Scott Outdoors podcast. I've got Darr Colburn, my hunting partner, on the other end of the line, and we just survived a mountain goat hunt in Alaska. Darr, how you doing? Yeah, so am I. We've both now had 2 days, I guess, since we returned home. Last place I saw you was the airport in Seattle. We flew Alaska Airlines from Anchorage to Seattle, and then you headed on to Phoenix, and I headed to Denver, and we were on quite an adventure for sure. Uh, I want to talk today about our hunt and how everything went down. Talk about our gear and things we liked and maybe things that we would do differently, food and what have you. But first question is, how sore are you? You know, it's crazy. You speak of the Devil's Club, like in Arizona, in our Cooster country, we're used to that, cat claw and manzanita and some thick brush and what have you. And
I don't even know how to explain it other than if you know, guys that are listening that are goose deer hunters, if you just imagine walking through catclaw brush um, that's over your head, you know, just nonstop, and then throw in downed timber. You know, I'm not sure if those were fir trees or what those words are, but um, spruce, big down timber, and literally taking backpacks off, you know, putting backpacks on, you know, going under logs, over logs. Uh, when we first went up that from that beach, we went 0.79 miles, and it had taken us 5 hours. And you know, I got to thinking about that, Darr, yesterday. Like, I think I could crawl 0.79 miles in. I think I could crawl on my hands and knees in probably an hour. And how it took us that long. It's been kind of fun on Instagram. I've been posting a bunch of photos and videos from our hunt and from the adventure, and you know, as far as the thick vegetation and you know, the Devil's Club and the alders and what have you, the video, would you agree the video, I mean, it doesn't even come close to like depicting how it actually was. So let's back up a little bit. Back in the, I guess it would be the winter and spring, I had done a podcast with a friend, Frank Sanders, who's an outfitter, Alaska Trophy Outfitters. They're out of Soldotna, which is very close to Kenai there. And he said, "Hey Jay, you and Darr ever interested in going mountain goat hunting?" I said, "You know, I've never really thought about it, but you know, tell me about it." And you know, he's got one place that he goes that's a fly-in alpine lake, and you kind of fly in above timberline, kind of above all that Devil's Club and all that thick brush. And to make a long story short, he had a bunch of guys that had been applying with him for years, and uh, you and I drew, and they drew, and you know, out of common courtesy, you know, he said, "Jay, you know, those guys have been putting in with me for years. I kind of got to take them to that spot, and you know, got another spot we can take you to that's really good. My guides, you know, shot a couple Boone and Crockett billies on the first or second day." I'm thinking, wow, this sounds too good to be true. And I even remember telling you, and you're like, "Don't count on it. Like, you know, we're going on an adventure." And but in my mind, I still had, yeah, I mean, it's probably going to be, you know, a slam dunk deal. Well, turns out when we landed, there was some, I guess, an issue with the airplanes and where we could land and what have you, and we ended up going to another spot, and that's the spot we ended up going to, and you know, I don't want people to sit here and go, "Oh, these guys are just complaining the whole podcast," but it was definitely a tough hunt. Would you not agree? Yeah, I mean, I was honestly, I was dreading going back down through the timber, you know, going back to the beach, just in the fact that, you know, the day we landed, it was it was fairly sunny. It was cloudy, you know, a few clouds here and there, but you know, the sun was kind of out, and it had not rained. And so when we were, you know, coming up, a lot of those logs and stuff, the ones that we were able to get up on, you know, and walk. And the reason we were walking is because the underbrush was, you know, 5, 6 feet tall, and these logs actually allowed us to, you know, walk for, you know, 8, 10, 12, 15 feet and actually gain some ground rather than just fighting brush. And you know, the bark and such was, you know, dry, but you know, as much as it had rained in the 5 days that we were up on the mountain, I was really nervous about how wet and how slick everything was. And turned out, you know, it was every bit what we thought coming down. You know, just slipping and sliding and falling in the Devil's Club and what have you. And but it made for an adventure. Maybe we ought to start at the beginning and talk about when we first fought through the brush and we climbed out of the tree line. You know, I was just immediately in love with the, you know, above timberline country. and the beauty of it. I'm interested in your take on it. The flowers were, there was all sorts of colors of flowers, and I thought it was cool the contrast are, coming from Arizona, being desert rats like we are, the contrast of how green it was, and then, you know, compare that with, you know, the inlets there, and then the Pacific Ocean. Where we were was kind of this, strip of land where we had a kind of a big inlet, maybe a couple miles long on one side, but then we had the Pacific Ocean basically on the other, and it's just a rainforest, just a coastal wonderland. You could look out there and see whales. You could look out there and see small fishing boats, and it was really unlike anything that I had ever seen in person. And it was, you know, in some of those high country basins, it just reminded me of, high country mule deer hunting, lots of rock, lots of scree, and, big grassy chutes and stuff. You almost thought you were in, the high country of Colorado, with the exception of, all of the water that you could see around. Kind of like Lord of the Rings type looking stuff. New Zealand, yeah. Yeah, and I think as well as the scenery, we were we flew in on a de Havilland Otter from the 1950s and 60s. I don't know the exact year of the plane, but I did a little research, and there were only 466 of those planes made, and they were kind of, the U.S. military, I think, was one of the largest. Um, I guess they made the biggest orders for those Otters, and felt really stable in the air. It was amazing to land on the water. It felt smooth. I was real curious to see how that was going to feel. But that, getting picked up in an otter, taken, dropped off, and then, picked up again and taken back to civilization, that was truly a high point for me. And then, the mountain goats themselves, having very little experience, seeing those things. Even though most of what we saw were nannies and kids, just really neat. The kids are really, really cute animals, and really neat to see how they really stay in groups and kind of stay in those family units, and um, they're in the roughest, steepest, most nastiest part. I mean, you could almost predict where they were going to be. And it was cool also looking miles, across, the ocean, across, inlets and different waterways where, obviously we could never get to unless we, took another plane. But, yep, you'd look across and there'd be some goats up there and some goats over there. It was just a smattering of goats kind of all over. I had a question come on Instagram saying, are you guys sorry you didn't take tripods? And our guy, I answered the question on Instagram. No, the goats, they stuck. A lot of times you could see them, like out to a mile with your naked eye. There was never a real situation where they were very hard to see, in my mind. And hand holding our 10 by 42 EL Swarovskis was perfect. And we knew going into it that Joe Faulkner, our guide, had his little lightweight tripod and brought his Swarovski 85 millimeter ATX spotting scope. So, do you feel like not having a tripod was a hindrance? Yeah, and thinking forward to my Northwest Territories hunt for Dall sheep next year in the McKenzie Mountains, with the white sheep, I'll be curious to see if it's the same type of thing, whereas, as long as you have a tripod and a spotting scope to evaluate the rams, is it really necessary? And, I mean, you spotted several goats way off just with your naked eye, and you're like, oh, there's some goats right over there. And I mean, if you panned it all, the contrast with the green, and even in the scree rock, the black, real gray black rock, I mean, those goats even bedded, really stuck out. So the first day when we finally cleared the tree line, and then, we're up above timberline, and we hiked, and we got to a couple of those first little lakes. And it was amazing to see all the different water. And Joe, our guide, he never filtered his water, and you and I filtered our water at that first pond before we made camp. It was just kind of a surreal feeling being, it was quiet around, although you could hear, off in the distance, you could hear some of the fishing boats and kind of the rumble of their motors and what have you. That was really the only noise. And then, we probably could have just drank right out of those lakes, but, I think by filtering, you just protect against, giardia or anything that we could have possibly gotten. But, Joe and even Frank, the outfitter, said, "Oh no, we just drink the water." And what'd you think of that Sawyer mini filter? Yeah, I don't have any I don't have any repercussions of that yet, and I imagine everything's fine. I mean, it's just probably straight rainwater, real fast moving water, but it tasted good, didn't it? So where we had our camp obviously was above timberline, and we set camp that first night, and it didn't actually get dark till probably 11:15 at night, and when we got to where we thought we were going to camp, I believe you and Joe spotted a couple goats. I'm not sure which one of you spotted them. A couple goats not too far from camp. I think they were 1,300 yards or something, 12 or 1,300 yards on the rangefinder. And Joe thought they were both billies. How excited were you when, right away we thought we had a couple targets? Yeah, and so we set our camp. We were actually by a couple little small lakes that I would say are probably, maybe 50 yards long by 20 yards wide, and look like where just rainwater had gathered, and it made it nice to have water right there, and pretty much everywhere we went we had water, and that's a little bit different than say some of the stuff we've done backpacking in Arizona, where one of the biggest problems or hindrances of backpacking in Arizona is you've just got to carry so much weight in water because of the lack of water around. That added a whole new element that we're not used to. Yeah, it was nice to freely drink and not have to, a lot of times when we're going on these Coues deer backpacks and stuff, I'm not saying you don't drink, but you almost kind of ration yourself and just drink just enough to keep you going, which, sometimes will come back to bite you. Our temperatures, it's a good point you bring up. I don't know exactly what the temperatures were, but I'm going to say, maybe a high of 60 and probably a low of, maybe the mid to high 40s. A couple mornings it was pretty crisp. I'm betting it was probably 45. But that night we set our tents, we made our mountain houses, and got up the next morning, and we got up the next morning, and those goats that we had seen the night before had moved all the way across the mountain range to I guess that would be to the west, and they covered a ton of ground and joined up kind of with some nannies and kids, but they turned out to be kind of immature billies. Uh, Definitely not what we were looking for. I think you had, right before dark, you had seen, or maybe at first light, you woke up and popped up, and you had caught them moving to go gather up with that other family group over there. And Darr, you had taken your bow, and I actually was packing your 6.5 Creedmoor, so we had, a rifle bow combination, which I think was good, with kind of the strategy and plan that you would try and stock them with your bow. Um, I think going in, my impression was I thought we were going to see a lot more, or I thought we were going to have a lot more opportunities for stockable billies, and as it turned out, I think we only saw four billies that we could actually get, like that were in accessible country to us. We saw some other what Joe thought were billies like across the water and miles away. But um, when did you realize that stop having numerous stocks on billies, because you weren't necessarily going after the biggest billy in the world, but you wanted to shoot a mature one? When did you kind of realize that the bow was going to be a challenge in the 5 days that we had to hunt? Like never even within a mile, I think. Yeah, I was going to say 5 or 6 at night. Yeah, the fog was rolling in really hard. Yeah, and I thought I would say, so I backtracked and we had come up with a signal on a trekking pole. I would actually put one of those Kuyu game bags so you could see the white, and I kind of wrapped it around the pole, and we had come up with the signaling that I would signal the direction that the goats were. And so I was pointing my arm, or the trekking pole with the white on it, straight out to the right, and then so if you picture me standing up with my arm straight out and the pole straight out, that means okay, the goats are to your right. And then I was trying to signal you distance, and the way we do that is basically take your arm, go down to your side. That's 100 yards, and I did that 9 times, trying to tell you they were 900 yards, straight out, in that direction that I was pointing. And I think that's a pretty good way to signal. And for people out there, if you've never thought of signaling, it's good to have a signal plan worked out with your hunting partner or your buddies, so that at least they have a general direction to go off of. And if you can come up with a distance, monitor, and there's a lot of ways to do it, but you had the general sense that they were, what I thought was 900 yards to your right, and that kind of gave you an idea of, okay, let's keep going. We can't see them from where we're at, but Jay's telling us they're to the right and they're 900 yards. Let's try and get some elevation to look with your eyes. I'm curious, from your perspective, not knowing exactly what I was telling you, what was your plan as far as trying to determine where those goats were? There was a nanny in that group that was a lone dry nanny, didn't have a kid, and Joe was thinking that she was 11 and a half inches, just super long. What was your impression of her, and did you get to see her very, very good? And I will add to that in Alaska, if you you can shoot a nanny or a billy, but if you shoot a nanny, you have to, I believe it's 5-year wait, meaning you can't hunt billies I'm sorry, yeah, you can't hunt mountain goats for 5 years. It's kind of a penalty, so to speak. But what was your impression of that nanny? Yeah. So that was the night. The second night is when the rain really kicked in, and it really started raining, and basically fog rolled in really hard, and I waited for you guys to come back, and we made our way back to camp in the rain. And where we were camped, yeah, and where we were camped, to give the listeners kind of an idea, we were kind of camped on this, let's call it a middle ridge. And from the middle ridge, we had kind of a ridge to the east and a ridge to the west that were kind of seemed like where most of the goats were. And to get to our camp, we had to ascend and descend, depending on which way you were going, about 500 feet, 600 feet, maybe 700, pretty good cliffy drop. So every time we had to leave camp, we had to drop off that, go through a saddle, and then work our way across a land bridge kind of to the mountains to the west, or rim around and go across another kind of a saddle to the mountains to the east and kind of southeast. But every time coming back to camp, we had to climb up, that 500 to 700 feet. It was a hump. And it made it a little bit of a challenge when it became wet because of how slick and how steep it was. and you've got the screed, the shale rock, and then you've got the grass, and it's kind of a pick your poison because at times the rocks were unstable and slick, but then you get on the grass and it was like walking on ice. Yeah. So I don't remember if that was the night that um, it rained so hard that night that I don't know if it was that night or the night after, but I woke up to it raining, and then it sounded different than rain. It was hitting that Kuyu Mountain Star tent so hard, and I kind of yelled out, and Joe says, "It's hailing." And it was hailing, and not long after that, and this went on for the rain, that hard rain went for probably a good hour, 45 minutes to an hour, and then the hail. And then the next thing I know, I could literally, inside my Kuyu tent, and I had the footprint down below the tent, and then I had the tent. I could feel my air mattress like wobbling, like, and it took me a second to figure out what was going on. Well, water was running between the footprint and the tent so much that it was like semi lifting my air mattress off of the ground. And you could hear, and I go, I got a river running underneath my tent. And I remember it was raining so hard, and I could hear you, and you said, I think I'm drowning, or something like that. But surprisingly, you know how those Kuyu Mountain Star tents, they have like that bathtub, I think is what they call it, where it's like, maybe 6 inches on each side, and then it's mesh, so it's kind of open. Well, I can remember looking out, and the water was literally just below the bathtub, and there were literally strips of water running underneath the tent, but it never as wet all around the tent as it was. It was completely dry inside. There was not a drop of water, and I thought we were pretty fortunate to have good equipment, and those tents are relatively new. We've used them a little bit, but not any puncture holes or anything in the floor of that tent, and stayed completely dry. How was it down? You were actually a little bit kind of lower. You were only probably 10 yards from me, but you were kind of in a little bit lower area, and you had water all around you as well. Yeah, I just remember spending that one day, complete the whole day, and laying in my tent and rolling. I had that Neo Air, that Thermarest Neo Air, and I remember thinking, I'm going to get bed sores because you didn't want to get out of your tent. I mean, it sound people listen like you weenies, but it was like it was raining so hard that I'm like, I don't want to get out of my tent, just to get out and stretch your legs. There were like 2 or 3 times where it would stop for just a second, and it seemed like we'd bail out of our tents just to stand up for a little bit, and then here it would come again, and we get back in the tents. But do you remember having that soreness in your back and kind of your hips just from laying for that long of a period? Yeah, one thing I really like, it's the Mountain Star two person, and they say it's made for two people. It's for me, I'm kind of a tall, lanky dude. It's perfect for one person with all your gear. And we were talking, I'm sure in the circumstance, we could both fit in there and have, a gear on each side, my gear on one side, your gear on the other. But I would say it's perfect for one man because you feel like you have plenty of room in there. You can, move around. You can have gear on both sides. I kind of kept my pack and the rifle on one side. I kind of kept my food and my boots and such on the other side. And I can't say enough about those tents. The Kuyu Mountain Star was a highlight. The other thing that was for me that was a highlight was the boots. The Rebel K's, the Scarpa Kuyu Rebel K boots, were, I thought, probably the best boot I've ever worn as far as stability. They're a very, very stiff boot, which normally I'm not coming from Arizona and such, we typically don't wear those super stiff boots, but I mean, I needed every bit of the stiffness that those boots provided, and day in and day out, or at night, I would take the liner out of the boot and put them inside my tent and let them dry the footbed. Yeah, what did I say? The liner? Yeah, the footbed. And but our boots were just saturated, just constantly wet. But it was nice to dry that footbed, and they performed, I thought, fantastic. I mean, I couldn't have been more happy about how they performed. So the night before, or the morning that we got up to leave to fly out on the float plane, I had done that podcast with Justin Schaefer, and he recommended doing 3 layers, or basically on the heel, 3 strips of Leuco tape. And then he went as far as he taped Leuco tape around his big toes and then made 1 loop around over the top of his ankle. You and I both decided to tape, pre-tape, in essence, and it worked perfect for me. I didn't get a single blister. There was one time on my left heel I thought I had a hot spot, but it turned out that the Leukotape had just kind of turned a little bit, and I was able to kind of correct that. But I didn't get a single blister, and I probably had 100 miles on those Rebel Ks, hiking here in Colorado this summer without a blister. But you, on one of your feet, have kind of a protrusion on the back of your heel, right? And you were having some trouble with that rubbing. And our friend Eric Johnson, out of Jacksonville, Wyoming, he had recommended a sock liner, Swiftwick, the Aspire 7s, and um, he said that he also wears Kuiu socks and Kuiu boots, and he recommended those Swiftwicks. And we both leucotaped up, and we wore those Swiftwicks. And I have to say, I'm really impressed with those Swiftwicks below the Kuiu sock. What's your thoughts? Wait, a little bit? When we're talking your feet, there's no little bit involved in the thing. You're not going there, are you? You're not letting me go there. Darr Colburn has the worst smelling feet of any human I've ever been involved with. So what did you do? You took 2 pairs of Swiftwicks and kind of swapped them in and out. Yeah, that lacing system to keep your heel down, on the Kuiu site, that Todd Harney, who works there, has a video of exactly how to do that lacing system, and you showed it to me, and I started using it on that. You showed it to me when we got there, and I started using it immediately. Felt better, and felt where my heel wasn't coming up at all, but it wasn't so um, tight on my toes. In other words, before I was really, cinching down on the laces that were over the instep, or the top part of my foot, and basically just cutting the circulation off. Well, this, you can actually leave your toe, couple of loops on your laces there pretty loose, but then cinch it down so it was perfectly tight, like over the ankle area, which kept your heel down. And I thought that was a huge boost there. And you showed it to Remza also, who's right now in the Northwest Territories. And before he left, he told me he really liked that uh, lacing system. And I'm sure it's been around for years, but it was a tip that I didn't know, and I'm happy that you showed it to me. And you said, yeah, it's right on the Kuiu website, and really, really was impressed with that. Um, do you see yourself on these Coues deer hunts and sheep hunts and some of the stuff we have? Do you see yourself probably going to wear the Swiftwick liners and just stay with that system, or will you just go with the Kuiu sock, without the liner on some of these other hunts? Yeah, I think I'm going to get, you know probably a week's worth of Swiftwicks, just to have more of them for some of our Cooster hunts in Mexico and stuff where I can kind of just rotate them. And I thought they were a perfect fit with the Kuiu sock. One thing I'll say about the Rebel K boots is they're so light, which is, I felt like I was, a pound and a half lighter per boot than a lot, at least a pound lighter than some of the other boots, and I thought that made a difference. The other thing I would say is I wear a size 11 in every shoe that I wear, and I will tell you that the Rebel K's, my toes just barely touch in the foot box, and they're a touch tighter. So if I order another pair, I might go with the 11 and a half. They're perfect for me, but I might go with the next size up because it is a little bit crowded in the front. Anybody out there looking to get them, maybe get a half size up. So I want to take a quick second here and tell the listeners that GoHunt.com is actually doing a free trial of the Insider program, and it's a deal where you can go and try out the Insider. You can have full access to the Insider program for free. And the way you do that is just go to gohunt.com/jscott and click on the button that you want to do the free trial. It's totally free, and it's a great opportunity to see the best Western hunting resource out there. And they're doing this exclusively for the J. Scott podcast listeners. So go to gohunt.com /J. Scott, and you can find all the Western states, harvest statistics, draw odds, and you can look at all those trends of the harvest in each unit, and find those hidden gem hunts and some of those sleeper hunts and what have you. So I highly recommend that. Also want to remind you guys that the Kuiu mobile showroom is going to be in Dallas, Texas, August 24th through the 26th. Then Houston, August 31st through September 2nd. Lubbock, September 7th through the 9th. Albuquerque, New Mexico, 14th through the 16th. Grand Junction, Colorado. Salt Lake City, Cedar City, Las Vegas, Nevada, Phoenix, Arizona, San Diego, Los Angeles, and Reno. And the mobile showroom tour, the Kuiu World Tour, is wrapping up November 9th through the 11th in Reno, Nevada. And this is an opportunity to go see every piece of gear, every piece of clothing that Kuiu makes in every size. You can touch it, feel it, try it on. And it's just been a huge thing for Kuiu, and the customers across the country that have gone have had given rave reviews about the ability to go see the entire product line in gear. And I want to thank Kuiu Ultralight Hunting for their sponsorship of this podcast. I want to thank GoHunt.com Insider for their sponsorship, as well as PhoneScope. You can use the JScott16 promo code when you go to phonescope.com, get a 10% discount. And the Outdoorsman's, the Optics Authority, Cody Nelson there in our hometown of Phoenix, Arizona. The Optics Authority. If you use the J. Scott promo code, you're going to get a 10% discount there at outdoorsmans.com. You can also call them at 1-800-291-8065. Use the J. Scott promo code and get you a discount. Darr, another thing that was a real standout for me was that new Peloton 240, that Kuiu Peloton 240, the hoodie, or with the hood. With the wind and kind of the crappy weather and such, I really liked having that piece of gear. And my everyday get up was, we both wore the guide pants which I think were great, especially for fighting through the brush, and the Devil's Club. It gave us a little bit more durability there, and then a Merino Wool 145 Kuiu Ultra Merino shirt. But then I would always wear the Peloton 240, and you also took the 240. What was your take on the 240? Well, I would say the one difference, you wore a short sleeve 145, or I'm not sure if it was a 125 or 145 on the ascent and descent. What made you go with a short sleeve as opposed to a long sleeve, and did you like that decision, or would you do it differently? So you were just rotating them, keeping them dry and rotating them. And I also point out that you and I decided that every morning, just as a practice of habit, we would take the biggest Kuiu dry bag, and before we would leave our tent, just for kind of safety precaution, we would put our Kuiu 30-degree bags in the dry bag and roll them up so that, if a hurricane wind came in and, blew the tent over, at least we could always get in our bag, pull out the dry bag, and that sleeping bag would be dry. I thought that was important to, maybe pass on to people listening, that take the extra second to, protect whatever you've got in your tent in case the worst scenario comes up. That at least if you get back and your camp's ravaged, at least you can have some dry stuff to put on, and a dry bag to get in. Yeah. Now I made the mistake on that deal when you finally got your goat and we made that hike all the way in to get the goat. I forgot to didn't forget. I kind of decided that we'd be walking and be too hot, and I didn't bring my super down pant and jacket, which I always brought every other day. And then I got cold up there. It was really cold when we were working on that goat.
All right. Darr, I want to talk a little bit about the food and maybe what you would do different or what you thought you nailed as far as your food setup. One thing I was thinking about is that I usually get the scrambled eggs with bacon for my breakfast, and I added that breakfast skillet 3 mornings. And I really like that breakfast skillet. I'd recommend guys try that compared to the eggs get kind of old with the. Dude, I'd see you eating those peanut M&Ms, and I'd come over like a little puppy dog, like, can I have a few of those? And it was that was another highlight that I think I would do differently also, is a little baggie of peanut M&Ms. It's funny, the little things like that. I mean, you would almost hold them out like, here they are, and oh man, I'd have paid good money for those for sure. And I'm jumping ahead, but you packed freaking Snickers bars up on the mountain, and you descended from the top all the way down to the beach, and you get to the beach, and I didn't have a drop of food left, and you had a whole bag, including at least 3 Snickers bars that I know of, because I know I ate 2 of them when we got to the beach. I remember after I ate the first one, I go, there's another one in there. Are you going to eat it? And you're like, no, go for it. I go, no, really, are you going to eat it? And you go, nope. And it was like I was jumping up and down. I ate 2, I don't eat sugar. Well, let me back up. If it were left to me, I'd eat sugar every day, ice cream. I'd weigh 600 pounds. My wife's a bit of a health nut, so I don't eat much sugar. But when I get a chance to eat sugar, man, I'm like a fat kid on a cupcake. I mean, it's just like, you know how it is with me. I rummage through stuff. But my point is, if I'd have been hiking down that mountain knowing that you had Snickers bars in your pack, I'd already ate both of them before we even got to the bottom. Gotcha. Do you think you had enough, or would you have packed a little bit more? See, I felt like I was a little bit light. Like I said, I would have packed just a little bit more food, just because I usually would have everything eaten and feel like, man, I could, not that I wasn't surviving, and but I wouldn't mind carrying extra, 1 more pound for the whole trip and have a few extra little things. Yeah, next time I'm definitely going to go with the full 2 servings. Just feel like that little bit added extra weight would go a long ways. I never felt, full after eating dinner, and I would just go to bed kind of hungry. So I imagine if it was, like on my sheep hunt when it's going to be 10 days, I can imagine just, you know, our hunt was only 5 days, but double that, having a little bit more food would be better. So that's something I'm going to make note of for sure. Um, yeah, for sure. Okay, we both used trekking poles. There were a lot of times when we would just keep one trekking pole in the pack because the brush was so thick and stuff. One trekking pole was nice to kind of beat brush and kind of give you a footing. Um, I'm not sure if I would just go with one pole and not even take another one next time. Probably in that scenario where we knew we were going to be fighting brush. Certainly above timberline and some of that country, it was nice to have 2 trekking poles to give you stability. Um, and what about that time when I fell on when we were trying to get your goat and I went sizzling past you and you basically caught me? I felt like I was in the movie Romancing the Stone, flying down. Literally, it was like a grassy bench and it was real steep. And Darr and Joe were already in front of me, and I don't know what I did, crossed a ski tip or something, and freaking here I came just sliding, and I felt like I was going 90 miles an hour. Of course I wasn't, and then I felt this hand grab me. I'm like, oh gosh, that was ugly. I thought I was going to go careening off the old cliff there. That would have been pretty good video, I think. So let's go into I guess it would be the fourth morning. You woke up above camp, and there were some billies or excuse me, some nannies and kids that the afternoon before that you had seen, and you went up right when you woke up, and I believe you spotted a billy. Walk me through how that went and kind of how that unfolded. And at that point, it kind of got real in the fact that we knew that it was probably with the amount of rain and everything that was going on, like that was probably a window of time there when we needed to probably get that billy shot. Walk me through assessing that it was a shooter, and then tell me about the plan and the stock and the shot and how it all unfolded. And so, at what point? So you got set up in the gun, and then how did it unfold? What's crazy about the whole thing is I was probably only 400 yards from you guys across, and there was the fog and everything. The clouds were blowing up between us and rain, and your 2 shots, I never heard either shot, and I saw goats kind of trotting in and out of the fog. I couldn't tell what was going on. I didn't hear the shots, and then I finally heard Joe, kind of hoop or holler, and I thought, well, I don't know what's going on. Maybe he's trying to stop him, but I didn't realize you had already shot. And then I saw you guys kind of coming to me through the fog and realized that you had shot, and you kind of jumping ahead once we got to the goat. You had made 2 perfect shots, bullets literally within a half inch of each other. Um, Tell me about the bullet that you were using and the performance of those bullets, and we found one of them, and talk about the offside shoulder and where the bullets were and what have you. 2 nice shots in pretty tough conditions with the rain and the fog, and having a small window to shoot through of a fog window of just an open. And it was a little nerve wracking because with the other nannies there and kids and what have you, and when it's all happening fast, when you're only looking at one goat because you've got a small window of fog, that the open patch, you kind of had to rely on Joe to say, yes, that's the Billy, and you shot him kind of in good faith that that was him. So that was awesome. Now once you shot him, we kind of regrouped, and we ended up trying to go down, and it took us a couple hours, and we kept getting cliffed out, and we couldn't get to the goat. Um, it was so steep, and that's where I did the triple Lindy, and was sliding down the mountain like a bobsled. But we had made the decision to go back to camp, pack up our camp, move all the way down off the mountain through the brush, and reset up camp, and then come up from the bottom to get that goat. And that turned out to be more of a chore than what we thought. And we ended up, it get dark on us, and we had to get up the next morning. It took us 5 hours to get to him. And in all, it was a relief to get up there and no bears had gotten on him, and it was a relief that it was cold, and we recovered the goat 100%, all of the meat, the cape. There was no hair slippage, and all the meat was good. That was a relief, wasn't it? And we were able to divvy up the meat, and you took the cape and the head and the horns. Um, and we were able to pack back to our other camp, and then we stayed that night, and then we packed out the next morning because our plane was coming the next day at 3 o'clock, and then we had to fight back through all of that brush where we had taken us 5 hours to go 0.79 miles, and now it was great that we were able to disperse the meat and such in 3 packs, but it was still a chore getting to the beach. And I can remember, being pretty tickled once we got to the beach, that we had gotten the goat, gotten down safely, and it was hearing that plane coming before we could even see him was a welcomed. Uh, it made I was excited to hear that plane coming for sure. Yeah, for sure. And then it was nice to load the plane and fly out. And it's funny, we flew out, and we we landed in Homer, Alaska, and the first stop we made was to McDonald's. And I normally don't eat McDonald's, but that was some of the best food. That tasted so good. A couple cheeseburgers and some French fries was just what the doctor ordered. One thing I was so intrigued with Alaska, not only the hunting opportunities, but in all the airports, whether it was Kenai or Anchorage or Seattle, all the fishermen, and to see all those rivers, and to see the halibut fishing and the salmon fishing. And that's definitely something I'd like to go back and do some fishing there. And even when I got back to Denver, there were guys that were on the Alaska Air flight from Seattle that, I mean, they literally were getting those dollies at the airport, filling them up with boxes of salmon and halibut that they'd caught. And most everybody that we talked to that were fishermen, had limited out on salmon and halibut. And being up there in those mountains and looking down and seeing those small fishing vessels and such, it really intrigues me to go back to Alaska and do all sorts of fishing. I think there's a lot of opportunity. Obviously, it's the fishing capital of the world almost. But I'm sure I'll be back. I know you kind of got the bug to go back, and we're asking Joe a lot of questions about the fishing and what have you. But overall, it was just an incredible experience. I don't look forward to fighting that brush again. That was definitely not something that I, want to do again as far as fighting that, that extreme brush. But hopefully can make it back another time to go and maybe pick a little bit better route where we don't have to, fight as much brush as we did. And but I would say for a first time experience in Alaska, on a float plane hunt, it was pretty awesome. And I felt like, you know, I don't know that we could have got two goats out of where we were safely with all that moisture and rain. I am not in the least disappointed that I didn't get one. Sure, would I've liked to got one, but the way it all ended up playing out, I was perfectly fine just bringing one goat off the mountain because I felt like I told you on that last day, I go, if a Boone and Crockett, if the world record billy goat walks through camp, I am not shooting him. And you just kind of laughed. Um, and people will hear that and be like, oh, you weenie. Like, okay, well, I mean, we've done a lot of pretty extravagant adventures and stuff, and this one was by far as strenuous. Not from a hiking distance or steep terrain. It was just the brush factor just made it just completely wore you out. Yeah, I mean, yeah, Frank was leaving with that other group, and they ended up having to wait like 3 or 4 days before they could even go to camp because they couldn't fly through the rain that we were enduring up on the mountain. Yeah, that's a great point. To leave yourself plenty of room on the front and the back in case you have to jockey around with the float planes or what have you. And even if we'd have got to the beach and the weather would have been bad, they wouldn't have come and gotten us. It would have been a scheduling nightmare. So I think that's a great point you bring up there. Well, moving forward, you've got an elk hunt coming up in Arizona. I'm excited to see how you do there. Is it just strategy seek and destroy, try and find a giant and get them killed? Is that what you're thinking? Awesome. Well, buddy, that was a fun adventure. I look forward to doing to the next adventure, and I know you boys have got some goose deer hunts, and we've got a lot of stuff planned this fall. So it's just a good start to the fall, and I'm going to do a little fishing here before I head to Wyoming. And yeah, I want to congratulate you on your goat and encourage the listeners to check out the Instagram at Scott Outdoors and at Darr Colburn. If you have any questions of me about the podcast or about this episode or Alaska or any gear or anything, you can email me at jscottoutdoors@gmail.com or send me a direct message through Instagram. And you can email Darr at darrcolburnrealtor@gmail.com or send him a direct message through Instagram. We're happy to answer any questions you might have. I appreciate the listener support and I want to remind you about that Go Hunt free trial. To go to gohunt.com/jscott. It'll take you to a specific page. Just follow the directions right there. Right on the page, you get to check it out for free. And it's a 30-day free trial, so you can really dive in and take a comprehensive look at the Insider program and encourage you guys to do that. And thank you for all of your support. And Darr, until next time, God bless you. And we'll be anxiously, I'll be in Wyoming waiting to hear the stories of your elk hunt and looking forward to, I think it's going to be a great season down there for you. Okay, buddy, sounds good. Catch you later.